My name is Danny Harvey. I'm a professor in the Department of Geography at the University of Toronto, and I've been teaching coming up on 38 years. And I've been teaching a course on global warming for maybe 35 of those years. And of course, the global warming issue impacts every human activity and every human and natural system and ecosystem, and is a threat to sustainability in many, many ways. So if we don't solve this problem, everything else is academic. And I teach two courses on energy, one on energy efficiency and the other on renewable energy. And the importance of energy efficiency, I think, is not fully recognized. If we're not efficient, we're not going to be sustainable. We cannot just simply switch from fossil fuels to wind and solar renewable without downsizing our energy requirements as well, because otherwise it won't be sustainable. The approach I take in my two energy courses is to try to reduce complicated calculations to something simple, because doing what you might call a back of the envelope calculation, you can usually get within 10% or 20%, right, of the most complicated full-blown calculations you could imagine. And you can show that your answer mostly depends on a small number of parameters, maybe 2 or 3. So in that way, you can see what's important and how the result depends on these driving parameters. So that's the name of the game. I always try to stress the physical and the intuitive rather than the abstract. And also, so I present in my courses calculations that for an art student are quite daunting, but I'm pushing students beyond their comfort zone in that case. For an engineering student, the calculations are simple, but then there's the interpretation. It's one thing to get a result. It's another thing to understand why you got that result, or when you change a parameter and you get a completely unexpected result. But that result is a result of whatever calculations you're doing, right? So you should be able to, if it's a simple calculation, but even the simplest calculation still can give surprising results. So, but when you get a result that's surprising and then you come to understand it, so it's not a surprise anymore, you gained intuition, right? And so that's what I try to do, is build a sense, right, of how things work and what's important and how things change. My energy courses involve Excel-based problem sets. So I provide a template, steps to do the calculation, and then I illustrate, the first few steps. And I just encourage students to get started early, to identify where they need help, and then come to me for help. There's one way of doing something right and 100 ways to do it wrong. So the odds are you're going to make some mistakes along the way. So usually when the students tell me the answer they're getting, I already know what mistake they made, and I can correct them in about 10 seconds. I like helping the students find the answer. And, I've had students who are not so strong. They're not physics or math or engineering students. So they're not as quantitative as other students. And, it's definitely outside their comfort zone, but they've said, well, this is still worth it. Their mark might be a bit lower too as a result, but they've learned something. If you take a chance, you go outside your comfort zone. If you are methodical and get the help you need, you're going to pass. The other thing that's important is to not procrastinate, to get an early start so that you have time for a few cycles, right? Of working on
Yes.
it, seeing the professor, working on it, seeing the professor. So that's important, but because each problem set is spread over a few weeks. And just as an aside, I'm finding recently students don't come for help the way they used to, and they leave assignments until the last minute. And that's been a real problem. If you're starting a 3-week assignment two days before the due date, you're already in big trouble, and you don't have time for that back and forth. Well, when it comes to complex subjects or relationships, there's usually some simple relationship that explains 80% of the complexity and variation that we see. And so the name of the game, and we do this throughout science too, is to simplify nature, right? Or to simplify engineering energy type relationships. So it's as in the problem sets, right? I try to focus on the big picture, the key factors, and just forget all the details. Students still find the course packed, my course is packed with information. So for students that want to learn a lot, I mean, even simplify, it's a big complex world, even simplifying it as much as we can, there's still a lot of relationships to deal with, and even 2 or 3 variables interacting together can behave in surprising and counterintuitive ways. Even very simple systems can still have a complex and rich behavior, simplifying it as much as we can. So I try to give, like I talk about energy use in buildings and how to design buildings to be far more energy efficient. And one can reduce what one needs to do to a handful of relationships, right? There's 2 or 3 general equations will explain, right, most of what you need to know. Okay, well, I think one of the most important things when it comes to sustainability is to be able to collaborate with and communicate with people from different disciplines and different specialties. So when it comes to energy use, it's far more than just an engineering problem. It's also a psychological problem, a behavioral problem, an economic problem, a political problem, right? And a policy problem. Policy means actual regulations or economic incentives that will actually change people's behavior in the intended way. And, there's this law of unintended consequences, and there are many examples where government implements a policy intending to have a certain effect, and it has the opposite, right? And it's hard to anticipate that. So you've got to bring together to the same table, right? People with different perspectives and different lines of expertise to offer. So being able to communicate, to understand a little bit the concepts and the vocabulary of these other disciplines, I think is really important, because we have been divided into silos. And it is important. I mean, we need some people that are highly, highly specialized, right? How to squeeze 1% more efficiency from a certain device, right?
Yes.
But that's not going to be useful if people don't adopt it and use it, or if it's not economical, right? So we, not to diminish the importance of hardcore specialists, we also need people who are more general and who can communicate and interact with people from a wide array of disciplines. And so I think that's what a sustainability program should be offering, is an interdisciplinary synthesis to some extent. Yeah, it's interesting what you said. There's an architect, I think, once said, a sustainable building has to be beautiful, right? Because if it's beautiful, you're going to want to keep it. preserve it and repair it. And then it lasts longer, right? And so part of sustainability is good design. Good
Yes.
design of buildings, good design of cities, the street network, right? And it has to be attractive, right? And appealing to people. The benefit of a sustainability program would be to provide a more holistic understanding of the different elements that need to be brought together, right, to truly create something sustainable. I mean, we use the word sustainable in a loose sense, but I mean, for me, sustainable means it should last indefinitely, pretty much forever. So that's quite demanding. And so if something is going to run out and you're just going to delay when it's running out, that's not really long-term sustainability. So I think we need to think deeply, right, and deep hard about, really long-term sustainability, because what is 100 years, right? In the history of human civilization, in the history of life, in the history of this planet, 100 years is nothing. Even 1,000 years is not very much. But I think if we could create a society that could last 1,000 years, right, then we'll probably figure out a way to make it last 1,000,000 years. So I think true sustainability, we need to think in very long timeframes, and that means we have to think really deeply and really hard, right, about the various issues. And so a sustainability program, if it's directed towards true long-term sustainability, is going to force and require really deep and really hard thinking.